I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar today, Eyes on Safety, Using Virtual Care to Combat Workplace Violence. My name is Sarah Quiring. I am the Senior Product Manager for Clinical Applications at AvaSure. And on behalf of the AvaSure team, I would like to thank you for being here with us today. As many of you know, workplace violence has become a significant challenge for our health systems, really affecting our caregiver morale and the care environment for both our staff and our patients. But this webinar today is about taking action against workplace violence, and I am so excited to be joined by two outstanding nurse leaders. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. I'm here today with Heidi Allison and Erin Robertson Otis. And in our webinar today, they are going to share some information about their virtual care program and how they're using it to combat workplace violence. I'm going to go ahead and kick things off with a poll, and then we're going to take a deeper dive into Heidi and Erin's programs, have a broader chat about their workplace violence prevention strategy, and then open the floor up to a question and answer session. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat, and we'll cover them as we go through our presentation today. So our current poll question: how are you currently addressing workplace violence at your organization? Wonderful. It looks like we've got a couple responses, so I'll go ahead and maybe give it another 15 seconds here. All right, it looks like we've got a broad mix. Well, I am really excited to hear more about that from our audience. So let's go ahead and go to our next poll question here. What technologies has your organization implemented to address workplace violence? All right, got you there. So I will go ahead and I'm going to turn things over to Heidi. Heidi, if you could please introduce yourself a little bit, and then I'd love to hear about your virtual care program.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate being allowed to present here today for this all-important topic and how to combat violence in the workplace virtually. Again, my name is Heidi Allison. I've worked here at Providence St. Peter's Hospital for 15 years. I started out as a bedside nurse on the med-surg unit here, and then I moved to an assistant nurse manager role and later became the manager of the remote visual monitoring team. The role of the assistant nurse manager is where I really got involved in helping staff at the bedside because after experiencing that myself, I really wanted to find a way to help our caregivers, whether they're nurses or CNAs, it didn't matter to me. It just was really important to do so. So the hospital that I work at, to tell you a little bit about that, we're a 372 bed facility. We're a level 3 trauma center, and we just got our magnet redesignation for the 4th year in a row, so that's super exciting. And we can go to the next slide. We are a hub site here at Providence St. Peter's for 4 different hospitals and have a total of 69 cameras. So we're monitoring 69 patients. And we are actually monitoring those patients clear to Eastern Washington and way up north in Everett, and then Centralia Hospital, as well as our hospital here in Olympia, Washington. We can go to the next slide. So the virtual care solution, we started out just with rounding and coaching our staff when violent incidents occurred. Before cameras came about, we also developed signage, that special signage that maybe you have at your hospital, hopefully, that was designed to discourage aggression from both staff and visitors alike. Then we started using the technology. So we had several caregivers in patient rooms that were far from the nurse's station that ended up getting injured from patient violence. And it wasn't enough for us to do this rounding, so we also implemented our cameras to help keep our staff safe. So we communicated with our nurses hospital-wide. We do it at our bed huddle in the morning. And all the charge nurses go to that bed huddle, and our remote visual monitor lead goes to that meeting as well. And then if they have a particularly violent patient that they're concerned with, a lot of times those patients are flagged in the EMR. And so then that will trigger the nurse to think, oh, do I need a camera for this patient? And we use those cameras even if there's a one-to-one sitter, or I should say especially if there's a one-to-one sitter in that room, because we want to make sure our staff is safe, especially if they have a history of violence. And then when that camera is up and running, then we can watch that patient behind the scenes and look for any escalating behaviors. For instance, the patient is starting pacing in the room, they're pulling out their lines, they're throwing things. So then our staff is able to, I want to say, intervene beforehand. And one of the other things that we didn't stop with just the cameras. We also have implemented these personal alarms too. So the one-to-one sitters can have these little personal alarms on them to utilize if they are needing attention right then and there. A lot of times the caregiver can pull that. It might stop the patient in their tracks or the visitor, whoever is getting aggressive, and it'll actually attract all the attention of our other staff immediately, and then they can have the help and let them know that help is on the way. And we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the cultural impact that this has had using these cameras and all these other means that we have to help prevent violence to our staff has been fantastic. We have had over 759 violent events prevented in the past year. And this is from our AvaSure cameras and the data that we have from that. One of our safety stories I would love to share. It was on a particularly busy day in the ER. A young male patient with a history of violence and aggression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. This patient woke up from their sleep and they began pacing the room, throwing objects. They were attempting to use the computer in the room. And this was what the telesitter, the remote visual monitor tech had noticed. And they noticed that escalating behavior. They used their STAR protocol, stop, think, and act review, and they promptly alerted the nurse and security behind the scenes before anybody had made contact with that patient. The patient's agitated increased. The monitor tech activated our stat alarm at that time, initiating more support. When the patient actually threw open the ED room door, they slammed it against the wall. The patient then began swinging at staff, attempted to assault a physician and others nearby. Security and the ED staff all arrived, were there working together. They intervened in this situation before it got really worse. It took 14 staff and security to safely place the patient in restraints. And so this was one of our bigger events that had happened, and by our remote visual monitor techs using the STAR protocol, they were able to intervene and prevent any serious injury and ensured that safe outcome for everybody. And so the patient actually then was, they intervened with the police, and the patient was charged moving forward. So it was really great to have our team intervene because this outcome could have been a lot different. It highlights the critical role of these tools that we have, the camera, to prevent anyone from getting injured and promoting staff safety, which is great. The response that we've got from our staff, we had a manager reach out to us from Everett stating, thank you so much for your team and all that they do for us with a patient that was escalating. They said the patient was challenging and actually hurt a few of their caregivers, but everyone's okay. Patience and Restraints has a one-to-one. And again, thank you, your team, for their support. So really good news and really great that we're able to use these cameras for this reason. And we've encouraged our staff, the things I think that have been maybe lessons learned during this process, I'll share with everyone, is that a lot of times our remote visual monitors will reach out and ask the staff in the room, the nurses, hey, do you need help over the camera? And a lot of times the staff will say, we're okay. I've told the employees in the remote visual monitoring, please call security anyway, call for help, even if it seems like they don't want the help. If it looks like to you that there's a reason to have security there, call them anyway. We'll just ask for forgiveness later. Our nurses are pretty tough. All nurses are pretty tough. So that's understandable. But sometimes I think they can see that escalation happen ahead of time, and better safe than sorry is how we all try to work. And so I feel like these cameras too ensure a lot of teamwork, and they build a lot of trust, and they create a safe environment. So that's something that's really needed for these particular types of patients and even visitors. So I highly recommend using the cameras for staff safety. It adds just an extra layer to help watch over them just in case, because our staff matters. One of the reason why I put this on the slide, the always watching with Roz, one of our very creative remote visual monitors had made these t-shirts that I don't know if everyone can see it. It says, I'm watching, always watching you. There it is. And then the front of it had telecenters on it with a heart. So she was really great. She made these for our team. So we just love them, and it's really fun. And we are going to take questions at the end. So please place any questions you have for me in the chat. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing, Heidi. I really appreciate the insights and the stories that your presentation brought. You know, that's so important that we protect our staff, and it's just very meaningful when you think about it in terms of like the actual personal experience of staff. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Erin. Erin, if you don't mind introducing yourself, and then I'm really looking forward to hearing about your program.
Sure, thank you so much. Heidi, thank you for sharing that story of your hub. You have such an inspiring, like, rigorous program, and I really appreciate you going into detail and sharing specific stories. Really hit home with me as well. So I'm Erin Robertson Otis. I'm the nursing manager here for the remote visual monitoring department in Oregon. You can go on to the next slide. I can talk a little bit about myself, and then I'll talk about the background of my team here. So I was a nurse at the bedside for many years, working in an ICU step-down unit and on several different committees. One of them, towards the very end of my time at the bedside, was on our violence prevention committee. And definitely at that time, we were not at all incorporating remote visual monitoring as really an option or understanding how to use that. So it's been interesting being on this side, on the remote side, and trying to integrate into that process. And Heidi's system is inspiring to me, gives me lots of ideas. I already made lots of notes. Thank you for that, Heidi. So I have been with the Oregon Remote Visual Monitoring Department for about 3.5 years now. Time flies. In Oregon, we have 8 hospitals that are very broadly spread throughout the state. We have 2 that are large urban hospitals, over 400 beds each, and then 6 that are smaller, mostly rural. So it's a pretty diverse patient and visitor clientele that we deal with. And my hub is not on any of those hospital sites. We are remote together in an office building, which has its own challenges, right? Communication is something I believe in really firmly is important in every step, but particularly in this environment where we're doing remote care, like building those relationships is all about communication. So spread throughout those 8 hospitals, we have 100 AvaSure devices that are utilized for the variety of monitoring purposes. And each shift, currently we staff 5 remote visual monitoring techs. They can each watch up to 12 patients, and 1 lead who does all of the admissions and discharges and all of our breaks throughout the day. So that lead is the primary communicator to all of our house supervisors, all of the charge nurses, and as you know, the point 1 of escalation for any of the techs who are experiencing a problem or something they need help with. We can go on to the next slide. So I think, to me, violence prevention lands in a lot of different categories. There's definitely more violence than I remember being a part of the hospital environment when I first got into this work. And it's in a lot of different realms. To me, there's definitely a risk for our bedside staff, for our nurses and for our CNAs, that there's a risk of violence against them, verbal and physical, right? There's also the risk of visitors coming in as a potential violence risk to our patients and to our staff. And then there's also other situations here. I listed some of those. There's the risk that visitors are bringing substances into patients, which to me is a form of violence. We have frequent situations where a patient or a family member is making allegations against staff, and we use remote visual monitoring as a method to help witness, just did something like that occur, right? Where my team can say, I never saw anything like that happen, or yeah, I saw that this event did occur. And then there are the risks for patient violence to self. Those are kind of the big categories, and I'm sure you all have other categories you've come across, and I'm happy to hear about those when we get to the point where we're having the broader conversation. So those are the main workplace violence prevention categories that my remote visual monitoring team monitors for. Making sure I didn't have anything else I wanted to share on this one. You're welcome to go to the next slide, please. So in our daily operations, just to give you an idea of how that goes, again, it's all about communication, right? We have an online admission form that we've created where the direct care nurse can go into their saved site online and put in an admission form to us. And then the remote visual monitoring lead gets that document, and it mirrors the AvaSure admission form, so they can just copy and paste it into AvaSure. And then the lead has a phone call with the direct care nurse once the camera's on in the room to clarify, this is this patient, they have these lines, this is what I'm worried about. And if it's not appropriate, which often when we're talking about workplace violence, it's not appropriate to do that report in the room, the nurse will do the report outside of the room. In that admission form, the preferred method of communication is listed. We have a number of different hospitals. So some have Vocera, some have SpectraLink phones, some just have station phones, some it's an overhead broadcast. So the number that the remote visual monitoring tech needs to call and the person's name are listed there, as well as they do similarly an update for each shift, because it's so important to be able to get a hold of the right person in that moment when there's an event happening. So my team's escalation process on the inpatient side is they escalate to the direct care nurse when there's a violence concern, then they escalate to the charge nurse, then to the house supervisor. And then if that doesn't get them an adequate response for something they're worried about, of course, this isn't something emergent, then they would call me or my assistant nurse manager to be able to help advocate in a broader scale, maybe reach out to an individual. My team, this came about not that long ago. We haven't had, I would say, as robust a system as Heidi has going. So this is newer for us to be actively intervening with workplace violence through remote visual monitoring and using the AvaSure devices. So there were some events in the past, probably about a year ago, where my staff had witnessed an event that was occurring in the room. A patient was becoming more agitated and striking out at the nurse, and the nurse was trying to handle it in the room. And my team went ahead and called the operator in that hospital and called the code gray to the room. It was a wonderful save, but it wasn't part of our standard protocol. And that, that opportunity was there for me to say, yeah, absolutely. I should have made sure they knew already that they could call a code gray. So making that available to the remote visual monitoring tech, similar to what Heidi had said, so they feel empowered. If they're seeing something concerning, they know, here's who I call, here's how I get security there, here's how I make sure this person is safe. Because it's such a bad feeling to be on camera and to feel impotent, where you want to be able to reach out and do something for that person, that patient or that staff member or that visitor, and you can't physically intervene, right? So to know what your tools are and how you get help is really incredibly important. I'm good for the next slide when you're ready. So to me, the specific situations that have occurred, I picked just a few violence prevention scenarios that have come about with my team. So we had a situation a couple of years ago where it was at night and a visitor was at the bedside with a bedbound patient. And the remote visual monitoring tech witnessed this visitor slapping the patient repeatedly. So they called the nurse and told them what was happening. And I'm not sure how it was miscommunicated, but the nurse, I think, it was in the middle of something else and not quite able to respond in that moment. So the RVM tech called the charge nurse and called the house supervisor to get that visitor removed from the room. And they then entered an adverse event. We have a process, HRP process, where we're following adverse events. And my team in the morning let me know so I could file an APS report. So we had a whole, the police were involved in making sure that this patient wasn't being discharged to a location where that person was unassessed and caring for them. So that was, I think the scope of what we impact is so much broader than just in that moment. There's definitely the opportunity to monitor in that moment, but we're also, this was a discharge planning implication, which is huge. We're potentially could have sent this patient home to a location that wasn't safe if the remote visual monitoring tech hadn't noticed and escalated that. And I'm sure a lot of you have had similar situations with the second example here, where we had a visitor, this one was quite recent, a visitor brought a bag to a patient And later, the remote visual monitoring tech noticed that the patient brought out a vape pen. And here in Oregon, it's complicated, right? Tobacco isn't illegal, and in Oregon, marijuana isn't illegal. So a lot of times visitors don't think about that what they're bringing is okay outside, but not okay inside the hospital. So the patient began to use the vape pen. We don't know what was in it, but the remote visual monitoring tech reached out to the staff, to the bedside staff, and they came in and removed that item. And then later, the bag was still in the room. So the patient took a handful of home prescriptions and downed them quickly. So my RVM tech called the nurse and let them know that they had taken some items. So the nurse came in, did a full assessment with security in the room. They searched the patient belongings and re-educated the patient about, how this is unsafe, which is such a huge thing. I remember being at the bedside, I was always worried a patient would take something that I didn't know about, and then I would give their regular medication and put them in great danger. So risk to self, visitor risk to patients there. We had the third example, one of my staff who's here today noticed, it was only maybe in June, had a patient who was a risk for violence, and we knew they'd had several pre-code grays and code grays through their time on camera. But in this incident, the patient was in the room by themselves, and they had taken a disposable stethoscope that was left by the computer and had taken the top of it off, taken just the metal part, and then hid it in their pants. So quick thinking by the remote visual monitoring tech, she called the nurse and the charge nurse and said, this patient's hiding a weapon in their pants. You need to get someone in there to make sure that nobody enters the room. I'm afraid for what they're going to do. So they immediately called security. Security came in, they code grade them, they searched the room. Patient denied it was happening, but they searched the patient, they found the weapon, they got it removed, and it was much better than how that could have turned out. You can only imagine how that potentially could have turned out if a CNA or a nurse or a doctor or PT had come into the room and this patient had a weapon with them. Again, these are all pretty recent ones. I have others, but this is another recent one. My tech was monitoring a patient who had been confused, but not particularly violent. In that way, this was a patient who had dementia, and when they were frustrated, sometimes they would swat, but they weren't particularly violent. But they took this patient into the bathroom, two staff members, they were a two-person assist, took the patient into the bathroom. So my staff can't see into the bathroom the way that our rooms are configured, but they could see them go in there. And then they saw the nurse and the CNA run out of the room. So my staff called security and called the code gray and got security into the room, and the patient had attacked them in the bathroom. So both of those staff were able to stay safe. The patient was assessed by security before they were able to get out and hurt anyone else or make an attempt to hurt anyone else. It was a really amazing catch. And then I'm sure you all have had these as well, but we watch a lot of patients who are risk to harm to themselves, risk to violence to themselves. And we had a patient who had wrapped the call light around their neck. It can be subtle to catch, they can do it kind of slowly, but in this case, one of my staff noticed the patient had wrapped the call light around their neck. So my staff just hit the stat alarm and got the nurse into the patient to help the patient before they had done any harm to themselves. So yeah, there are a lot of very sick people, and having AvaSure devices is such a huge help, and there's so many ways we can implement it. So next slide, please. So I think for me, educating the staff, I have daily huddles morning and night. I do one, and my assistant nurse manager does the other one. And Friday updates, we send out good catches, we share these stories with our staff, that's required reading, and then quarterly staff meetings where we can share some of these learnings as well. I do a lot of setting expectations with my staff that it is on them to help educate the bedside staff in the moment on how we can help. So that's definitely something I put on them. So helping them feel adequately prepared and educated to educate nurses is important, where they feel they're owners of the safety they provide, right? Another thing I do is I send monthly emails to all the managers and directors, and then quarterly emails to all the CNOs, sharing these great catches, sharing these opportunities, and really imploring them to share opportunities for product expansion. Like, if there are services we can help with, let me know. If there are other forms of violence that are not being addressed and that you're worried about or that you're seeing, let me know how we can collaborate and help. And then offering to attend their staff meetings. I've taken different staff members to the sites and we've gone to the ED and gone to their staff meetings. We've gone to the float pool meetings, and just trying to solicit a lot of collaboration and understanding, and that's been hugely helpful. And the last thing I wanted to share is, it was when I was very first, it always almost brings me to tears, when I very first worked as an assistant nurse manager, my desk was right close to the team, just across from where I am now, and I could hear them talking. And one of my team was on the phone with a bedside nurse, and as she was getting off the phone, I heard her say, "We're here to help keep you all safe." And I wrote it down on a sticky note, and I've had it on my desk ever since. Heidi said something very similar. It's a powerful thing to be able to do work that helps other people stay safe. So I really appreciate it. One thing we do use often that I wanted to give a plug to, the AvaSure Analytics tool, is massively helpful for tracking trends, for showing improvement, for sharing it with your leaders, with managers, with CNOs, to be able to show, here's what we used to do and here's what we do now. And I recommend diving in there and using their educational services to help use that to your advantage as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erin. And that was wonderful to hear. And I really appreciate how you pointed out that we've been talking about like caregiver and violence against the caregiver, but you really are watching for such a broad range of activities in your organization. And I just thought that was a super important point to bring up. So I'm hoping Heidi will join us here again. But one of the things I heard both of you say is your violence prevention committee. And I'm hoping you can tell me a little bit more about that. Do you have like a governance structure for violence? What is that committee? Who is that composed of? What are kind of the goals that you've had in the last year or looking forward that you're hoping to accomplish?
Okay, I'll go first. Thanks, Erin, for sharing all that great information too. I wanted to say I appreciate you sharing about the patients with SI, right? That's also a really great utilization of the cameras, to help keep those patients safe, because a lot of times, they try different things. I've had that call light cord wrapped around they've caught the AvaSure telesitters have caught that too. So for our violence prevention committee, we implemented it probably at least 2 years now. It has been growing. We have our sister hospital, PCH Centralia Hospital, that has joined. And then also we may have the clinics joining us as well, the Providence clinics surrounding our area. Our security team comes to that meeting, reports off the violent events that have occurred in the hospital. They keep track of all the weapons that they've secured, that kind of thing. So they do that report off. And then we have our staff safety committee to attend as well and let us know about any events where our staff have been injured. And sometimes, so now actually it's a law in Washington State, starting in January, that we report out on every single one of those incidents that happen to our caregivers. And so now we're going to incorporate those more so into our violence prevention committee. And it is open to all of our, excuse me, it's open to all of our staff. So we have nurses attend, and it's growing. It's really growing, and so unfortunately, it's growing for the reason that it's growing. But it is we are thinking of different ways to help prevent these violent events, and then encourage different aspects and views, perceptions of different angles. We get all kinds of people there, so it's great to have that input from our staff. One of the things that have come up in our meeting is how can we have our patients' belongings searched when they come in through the ED, because a lot of times, like Erin had mentioned, they'll bring in all kinds of things like drugs and vapes and knives or weapons, those types of things. So we are working closely with security to make sure that we can prevent that. The patients from taking medications on top of medications when they get here in the rooms. Hopefully that answers some of your questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Heidi. Erin, feel free to jump in. I know you mentioned your violence prevention committee.
Yeah, so the violence prevention committee that I was involved with when I was at the bedside was specific to that hospital. So I feel like it's a great opportunity. It's possible. We're a big enough organization. I'm not positive if there is an Oregon-wide violence prevention committee. There very well may be. It's one of the things I have written down on my notebook from when Heidi was talking. That it's something. So when I moved out of that hospital in particular, I was no longer on that committee, and it's something I need to pursue, even if it's just to have contact with those individual committees and to solicit, just like I've done for the managers and for the directors and the CNOs, to say, how can I help with this? What are the biggest problems you're facing, and how can my team help address it? What are the things you're already doing? How can we integrate with this? I love that Heidi was saying they're using the risk for violence banner as sort of a conversation starting point for assessment. Do they need remote visual monitoring? Can the AvaSure services help? And I am inspired to jump in and make sure that this is something my team is capturing better. I would say, especially in the emergency department, that is an area where I have done some work with individual emergency department managers to help them. They're so inundated with often violent patients for many different reasons, and the ability to help there. It's such a fast turn and burn environment. Patients are at risk, staff are at risk, visitors are at risk. And if we can just be another set of eyes, it's so huge. So an opportunity for me, and hopefully an opportunity for many other people out there as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. One of the things that you both mentioned was really empowering your staff to take action for the nurse in the room, really for the patient. Can you tell me a little bit more about the training that you've implemented with your staff so that they feel empowered and competent to respond to those events?
I'll go. So just in rounding with my staff, so we have a room where all the remote visual monitors are in together. A lot of times when I'm rounding on my staff, I will remind them, hey, please make sure that even if the nurses or the CNA is telling you we're okay, we don't need some help, if you feel like it's a situation where you've seen the patient escalating, call. It does not matter. I'll back you and support you in this, because really it just matters that our staff is safe. And if they show up, security shows up, or extra nurses show up, or extra support is there, that's okay in the moment, because maybe they don't need it. That's okay. It's better safe than sorry kind of situation. And so I just remind them of that, because I've had the feedback from my staff saying, well, they said they didn't want security to show up that they had this. And I'm like, it's okay. You can still do what you need to do to keep them safe, because the situation can change within seconds. And so that's what I remind them of. And a lot of times, which is great, they will tag team. So one monitor tech will pull them up on the camera, and they'll mention to someone else in the room, hey, call security for me, and I'm calling this nurse. So they're 2 or 3 people in the room are actually, getting the attention of everyone that they need to help keep this caregiver safe and the patient safe too. It happens like that often, but I'd rather encourage them to do the right thing first, and then if we don't need them, we don't need them. That's okay. And security is okay with that. Security is great. They're like, call us, and if you need us, if you don't need us, it's great. At least we tried. And even sometimes we'll have our security team round on those patients that we know that are particularly violent. And at times having the security officer around on those particular violent patients actually kind of helps keep that patient as a AKA reminder. Okay, yeah, I remember I need to, not escalate my behavior. So that really helps as well.
Heidi, I love the integration you have with your security team. That's really wonderful. It's something we have a great relationship with our on-site security team, but we're remote, so it's different. So I think that's another opportunity for us. And similarly, I find for my team, I've shared it in the Friday updates multiple times, the numbers for our security dispatch team. So our security dispatch is centralized. So they have that number programmed into their phone so they can quickly call for themselves if they're in the parking lot, if they're on site, where they can call and make sure that they get through to the security team they need quickly. And I have had very similar situations. My office, I can hear the team, and lots of situations where there's a security concern, and I can hear the tech who's monitoring that patient. Okay, I'm calling the charge nurse, and then the lead will say, all right, I'll call security, and they're doing it simultaneously so they can get a multi-pronged response to those especially concerning rooms right away. Yeah, the collaboration is wonderful.
That's great. I forgot to mention, one, we love our security team. They're amazing. We sometimes will have 2 monitor techs watch a particularly violent patient at a time. So not just on one camera where one monitor tech is watching 12 patients or sometimes up to 16 depending. We will make sure that they're double watched. And if we can do that, because I feel like it's safer to have two people watching a particular patient, so it keeps our staff safe.
When I was a bedside nurse on the floor, I feel like a lot of the conversation was around like personal de-escalation of a situation, which is important, but I think you both brought up that there's also an element of kind of cross-functional change that we really need to have across our health systems to be able to address this very challenging situation. Can you talk a little bit, Heidi? I know you mentioned you have really good engagement with your security team. Are there other professions that you're working with? Is it solely nursing, or do you have other care type providers there?
We've had, yes, well, we have our physicians and our CNAs and our one-to-one sitters in the room. So it doesn't matter who is watching the patient or caring for the patient, that camera is in there to keep everyone safe. We had an instance when I was the assistant nurse manager back then when we didn't have the cameras, where a patient was very upset and he threw his entire tray. And as you know, those the little food warmer things got this clay disc in there at the doctor. The doctor unfortunately ducked out of the way in time, but it just goes to show that it just doesn't matter who's in the room, that everyone needs to be kept safe. So I'm really glad we have the cameras to help with that. We had another instance where IV therapy was putting in a PICC line, and that's a sterile procedure. So they had the room closed door. And again, this was before we utilized the cameras for this. We had the patient assault 2 of the IV therapist, and one of them had to have several surgeries, and it was a very bad case. And I had wished, in thinking retrospect, I'm working with that. She's now a nurse manager, but we're and talking with her about that situation. It was just such a escalated event, and if they had had a camera in the room, right, probably all that could have been, prevented. And so yeah, it's really nice to have the cameras. I'm just going to say to help with these situations, and not all the cameras in all the rooms. That'd be great if we could do that, all of our beds. But it's nice to know that we have this to keep any of our staff safe.
Yeah. Now, I know you mentioned, you've got the camera in the room to help keep your staff safe. What really prompts your organization to say, I have a potential concern for violence and I need a camera in the room? Do you have something that you flag in the EHR? Are you using a risk assessment? Is this more of like a nursing-driven protocol? Can either of you talk about that?
I can go first just because I think mine's short. No, I think yours, it's very much on nurse judgment. My assistant nurse manager and I do chart audits of all the one-to-ones in our state twice a week. And then we reach out to the charge nurse and email the manager for any patients that look like they could be on camera and who are not. So it's definitely an opportunity when there are those patients who are violent and they're saying, we're keeping a one-to-one in the room. There's the option to say, hey, maybe that one-to-one wouldn't need to be there. Maybe we could be there. Or if they do need to be there, do we need to be there to help keep them safe as well?
That's good. That's a good way to do that, Erin. We also, as I think I mentioned, that at our bed huddles every day, our charge nurses attend that, as well as our remote visual monitoring lead attends that to let everyone know this is how many cameras we're watching, this is how many violent patients, SI patients, that kind of thing. They go down the list. And then also at the end, they'll say, and we have one camera available. And so the charge nurses attending that, hopefully that triggers them. And I want to say our culture is well integrated for the charge nurses or any nurse to ask for a camera for a patient that is getting out of bed and climbing out of bed, or SI, that kind of thing. But they also, I want to say, think to ask and to know when that patient has a red flag in their chart. We use Epic in the EMR. So that patient is flagged in the chart. And so hopefully that triggers, and I want to say the culture here is pretty widely known. If they have a patient that's particularly violent, they can ask for a camera. And at times our house supervisor will ask and call into my team and ask for a camera if they know they've got a particularly violent patient too. So all the house supervisors are aware as well, which is great. And sometimes we'll escalate. There might be a waiting list for a camera for different reasons for different patients, but we will escalate that camera up if there is a particular need, especially if there's a one-to-one sitting in that room. Yeah. Because if the patient's violent and there's a staff sitting in the room, we don't want them to get hurt.
I had one other thing to add, which was, you just prompted me to think of that, Heidi, which was, we have had the situation come up, not a lot of times, but a couple of times with extremely violent patients, where having a 6-foot-long heavy object in the room is more of a liability than an asset. And that's the situation where I feel like the ceiling devices, man, do I want some ceiling devices. Like, I would love to have that where I know I can help keep people safe and there's nothing to hurl at anyone. So just putting it out there, everybody on the brink of being able to purchase some new cameras, ooh, I would get some.
Wouldn't that be great? That's wall cameras, maybe the little wall cameras too, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cameras for all the rooms.
Now, Heidi and Aaron, I know you both mentioned that you have very robust communication strategies between like your bed huddles and different newsletters that you send. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you developed those communication strategies and have worked to overcome any resistance to monitoring for workplace violence, or I'd say just monitoring in general?
Yeah, I can go. I think I'm an over communicator at heart anyway, so it's my go-to to share a lot of what's happening. And I just found it's a profound barrier. The trust between when you're not on site, it's really easy for bedside staff to see the remote visual monitoring tech as an extension of the device, as a machine, and to not see them as people. So it came from wanting to build those relationships, right? We have on our SharePoint site where the bedside staff go in to enter a request. I have photos of all my staff. So they're like, oh, Daisy, I've been talking to Daisy all night. That's what she looks like. It just humanizes them a little. So any opportunity I have for that, that's where this has come from. So yeah, I said I share with all of our hospitals a monthly report that includes any good catches. That's usually where my promotion of using remote visual monitoring for violence prevention comes from. But I would say I'm super inspired by this meeting myself. I keep writing things down because there's great opportunity to improve and to use it more fully. And I do get good feedback from the managers and directors and the CNOs with ideas and suggestions for how we can be more helpful. And I end up getting more feedback included in more HRPs, adverse event documentation, so that we can help process improve just by having built that relationship of, hey, it's me, we want to help.
I love that, Erin. I can use some tips from you on that on the SharePoint site, and forgot that you did that, and I need to take a look at that. I'll share my violence prevention stuff, and we can trade. We have a weekly newsletter that goes out every week to all staff here at the hospital, and that's been a really great tool that we utilize for a lot of things. I think that rounding with staff too, a lot of times I end up in all places of the hospital, remind the nurses and my caregivers in the Telster room to make sure that we're sharing those adverse events. And when I get those adverse events from my team, which is, hey, this happened in the room and the patient pulled out their IV or this or that, when we get those particularly major events, I forward those on to our hub site managers to let them know, and I'll get the feedback from those managers as well. And yeah, I just think the communication there with that weekly news helps as well. But I really do like that SharePoint site, so I'm gonna have to work on that. Thank you.
Yeah, lots of relationship building. For organizations that want to start monitoring patients at risk for violence, do you have any lessons learned or tips that they should know kind of starting down that journey?
I think one thing that the bedside staff have had a hard time all understanding at once, is a lot of people, is that when the remote visual monitoring tech is monitoring more than one person, which is every day, they can only hear in one room at a time. And that's been a great, it's a good tip to include when you're rolling the change out, that if they're wanting continuous audio, that's not really feasible. But the thing we do, like, especially it comes up a lot in the situation of staff accusations, where the patient is believing staff are doing something, and so we're monitoring to see if that's occurring as a witness, that the staff they call remote visual monitoring team and say, hey, we're going into room 217, can you keep an ear in there? And the nurses now know they can't listen continuously. If they have to interact in another room, But yes, their primary focus is like watching what's happening while the staff are in there. So it's been helpful in that way. And that's something I would say up front to make sure they're clear on.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Heidi, how about for you?
And also, I would say letting the staff know and understand that the camera is usually pointed at the patient. So if they're out of sight line of the camera, they're over here, out of the way. They're waving at the camera. The eye of the camera is focusing in on the patient. And so I don't know that everybody knows that. Obviously, it's got a little bit of a scope, but it is not a 360-degree view, right? So reminding staff of that as well before, they get a camera in the room to know, right, that they need to stand in front of the camera or that eye lens of the camera and wave at them if they are needing immediate attention from them.
Yeah, definitely some education for the nurses on the floor. Yeah, Erin.
Sorry, the other one I was thinking of is that if a patient is independent in the room, think about what your devices are capable of doing. I know that the wall-mounted devices have a much broader angle, and so potentially you could monitor a patient who is a risk for violence being anywhere in the room. As it is, we just have the floor ones, which are great, but if a patient is wandering around the room, my staff need to watch a fixed view so that they're not spending all of their attention moving a camera around when 11 other people are also moving around. So it's a limiting factor in what that patient's able to do. So think about what devices you have and what that makes you capable of monitoring.
Yeah, some good communication there, I think, between your staff and the floor staff so you can set people up for success. Well, Erin and Heidi, this has been a really lovely conversation. I've learned a lot. And I appreciate all of the effort you put into your presentations and sharing all of your great insights into violence prevention with your virtual care program. We are almost out of time here. So I'm going to make just a couple announcements. If you would like to join us for our symposium, we are going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina this year, September 15th through 17th. You can learn from other nurse and IT leaders how to implement and sustain a virtual care program. And you can scan the QR code to register. And then if you would like to connect with AvaSure further, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter by scanning the QR code here. So yeah, Heidi and Erin, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, and it was wonderful to see you both again.
Thank you.